Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 22nd of January 2016. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, NetherRealm and Warner Bros. Drop support for Mortal Kombat 10 on PC, and Hitman will now be a fully episodic title. All this in the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. In what could be called less of an announcement and more of an obnoxious fart in the wind, the community manager for NetherRealm, Tyler Lansdowne, posted on the Test Your Might forum, saying quite simply that Mortal Kombat XL, the forthcoming enhanced edition of the game, which would include enhanced netcode and other improvements, as well as the Combat Pack 2, which is a selection of new DLC characters, will be available only on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, skipping the PC entirely. You're probably waiting for me to read out the rest of the explanation for that, but there isn't one, because there wasn't one given. It was simply stated, it's not coming to PC. That's it. Needless to say, people are not very happy about that, and I can hardly blame them whatsoever. Mortal Kombat 10 had an extremely rocky launch on PC. It did not run well at all on release, assuming it ran at all for anybody, and it had a very strange download system involved with the launch of the title, which resulted in many players not actually being able to play the vast majority of the modes and the content in the game because the download system did not work. Mortal Kombat 10 was nominated in my arbitrary awards of 2015 for one of the most broken ports of the year. It did not win, but I have to say that were this announcement made in 2015, it would have certainly been stronger in the running. The botched launch of Mortal Kombat 10, along with weeks and weeks and weeks of problems with the online play, which has not really been fully fixed to this day, is of course responsible for the much, much smaller multiplayer community on the PC platform. Smaller community, no cross-platform play, of course, equals problems. The 30-day average concurrent player base for Mortal Kombat 10 on PC is a mere 991, which is actually less than Ultra Street Fighter 4, a game which is significantly older than Mortal Kombat 10. Now, initially you may decide to attribute this decision to a lack of sales on the PC platform, saying, oh well, it's a fighting game. Fighting games do not traditionally sell well on PC, so it's completely understandable that they would stop supporting it. Here's the thing, according to Steam Spy data, which has been confirmed as, for the most part, accurate by many developers over the course of the last year, states that Mortal Kombat 10 has actually sold almost 500,000 copies on the Steam platform alone. Now, this is quite impressive considering that Mortal Kombat 10 has not had significant price drops during its lifespan, nor indeed has it been part of a bundle, which is often the explanation for large numbers of sales on the PC platform for particularly old games. Mortal Kombat 10 has not been part of a bundle, and while it has had price drops, it certainly has not had significant enough drops to encourage people just to buy it and then not play it. The fact of the matter is that it actually sold fairly well. It certainly sold less than Mortal Kombat Complete Edition, but we should also bear in mind that that edition is 2 years older than Mortal Kombat 10, and has, of course, had significant price drops and bundling throughout its lifespan. In fact, if we were to compare it to the sales of various other fighting games, Mortal Kombat 10 did fairly well. Injustice may have sold 700,000 copies, but again, that game has been out for a year and a half longer than the latest Mortal Kombat, not to mention again that it's a much, much lower price. Compared to other fighting games such as BlazBlue and Guilty Gear, Mortal Kombat 10 sales figures blow them out of the water. And again, if you take the release date into account, it's pretty much on target in terms of its sales to be about as successful as the previous Mortal Kombat game, as well as Ultra Street Fighter 4 and similar high-profile fighting game titles. Basically, the game has not sold a small number of copies. Compared to console, yes, but it's still 500,000, and that, to me, is more than enough reason to continue to support it. Not to mention the fact that part of these Mortal Kombat 10 updates, which the PC is not getting, include significant netcode updates, which would solve a lot of the problems that people were having on PC to begin with. This to me is pretty disgraceful. It's obviously showing very little regard to those that decide to game on the PC platform. They bought the same game as everybody else did, and they, as a result, should certainly be supported for that. Dropping support for a title less than a year after launch, especially when your title is AAA, is to me unbelievably unreasonable, and quite frankly, not bringing paid DLC to the platform is insane. Even those that were willing to continue to give you money despite your blatant disregard for the platform won't even be able to do that as a result of this decision. Mortal Kombat 10's relatively small player base on PC, active player base at any rate, is the fault of the developer. And the developer was, of course, High Voltage, not NetherRealm. High Voltage were those responsible for the port, which, as a result, ended up being a mess, just like everything else High Voltage does. And of course, who is responsible for making the decision about who does the port? Yes, indeed, that will be the publisher, Warner Bros. Games, WB Games. At this point, there's a catchphrase going around that says Warner Brother whenever Warner Bros. Is involved in a PC game, and I don't blame them. Now, some people may decide to come back with a counter-argument and say, well, Mad Max was good, and Shadow of Mordor was good. Yes, that is true. However, it's worth noting that both of those PC ports were handled by the original developers, that being Avalanche and Monolith, respectively. Whenever Warner Bros. Farms out the port to a third-party studio, we get a mess. That's why we got Arkham Knight. It was given to Iron Galaxy, and they messed it up completely. And that, indeed, is why we got Mortal Kombat 10. It was given to High Voltage, and yes, they messed it up completely. It's frankly ridiculous to suggest that Warner Bros. Is even acting in good faith to begin with. You may point to Shadow of Mordor and say, hey, yeah, that was great. Yes, it was, but don't you remember the ridiculous nonsense that was going on with the PC version when it came to getting review codes? The only way to get a PC copy prior to release in order to actually look at it and critique it was to sign up to a promotional brand deal, one of the terms of which was you're not allowed to say anything negative about the title. You may recall that I was the source for that story breaking in the first place when I handed it over to Jim Sterling once I found out that this was the case. And that is entirely Warner Bros.' fault. They deliberately restricted, for basically no apparent reason, pre-release review copies of the PC version of Shadow of Mordor, even though the game was good and the port was good. Why did they do that? To control the narrative. The only media they wanted out prior to release had to be positive. And of course, if it was bought and paid for, which it was, then of course it's going to be positive. It's going to be biased. And a lot of that wasn't properly disclosed on YouTube either, I might add. These are the reasons why Warner Bros. Was nominated for Dodgiest Games Company of the Year in my Arbitrary Awards video. And if they'd done this in 2015 again, no, they still wouldn't have been worse than Konami, but you get the point. They are not friends of the PC platform, and this latest decision only further cements that idea in my mind. Let me put this a different way. As a result of the business model of AAA publishers in the last 5 years, that being launch the product as a platform to sell DLC, there is now a reasonable expectation in the minds of gamers that a game will be supported past a certain point as a result of DLC. Not only that they will be given the opportunity to purchase said DLC, and future content has been ingrained in the mind of many gamers as part of their purchase decision. That's why season passes exist. That's why DLC plans are laid out. That's why updates are planned out and announced 6 months in advance. That's why, indeed, expansion packs exist. I think that this is a self-inflicted issue. This has come from the AAA publishers of this industry. They have created this environment, and as a result of this behavior, when they turn around and say, you know what, no, we're not going to support this on your platform, screw you, even though you bought the game at the same price as the console guys did, then people have a right to be upset. I think this is ridiculous, frankly, and I would certainly hope to see a reversal from Warner Bros., but it is highly unlikely to happen. That said, we are talking about the same publisher that was willing to pull a broken Arkham Knight from the store entirely and actually offer refunds, although I have a feeling that they were somewhat forced into that position. I don't trust them, and I don't believe that other gamers should have a reason to trust them either. This is just the latest in a long string of examples of Warner Bros. Mistreating the PC platform and treating it as a second-class platform. You know what? I'm not okay with any platform being treated that way. I think that there should be equality, there should be parity amongst platforms when it comes to updates. And yes, there are PC games that get updated more often than console games. And really, one of the only real justifications for that is that it actually costs money to update a piece of console software. You actually have to pay a fee in order to do it, whereas you don't have to do that on PC. Regardless, I pointed out last year the disparity between the PC version of Payday 2 on the Xbox One versus the PC, and I wasn't okay with that either. So this isn't just cherry-picking and defense of the PC platform. I'm not okay with it regardless of what platform it is. I just happen to be a PC advocate because this is a PC gaming channel. Why the hell would I not be? Not impressed, Warner Brothers. Not impressed one little bit. And finally, strange tidings from the realm of Hitman from Square Enix and IO Interactive, as console users had their digital pre-orders cancelled, and later it was announced that Square Enix had completely restructured the business model of the game to be fully episodic. Now, we did know previously that there would be some element of episodic gameplay with Hitman. A Q&A released in July of 2015 stated that what they would be releasing on launch was not the full game, but a sizable chunk of it. Throughout 2016, they planned to release more locations and missions until the story arc was done and finished, and all of that content would be included in the $60 price tag. They stated that Hitman was not an early access game, and, quote, "We think the word episodic sets the expectation that we sell individual content drops for individual prices, but that's not something we're planning to do." Now, following a delay to the title, as of January 15th, 2016, Hitman is now fully episodic. Square Enix and IO Interactive announced that the first part of the game, being released on the 11th of March, would include only 2 missions, the Prologue and Paris, which would cost $15 or your regional equivalent, and would be called the Day 1 Intro Pack. It would still be possible to buy the entire thing upfront for $60, and they also said that the complete season would launch on disc at the end of 2016. Now, the individual chapters and locations are priced at $10 each, or there's a season pass upgrade that you can get. So if you bought the intro pack and then decided, yeah, I want the rest of it, you're going to actually end up paying slightly more. That would be $65 as opposed to $60 in total. So it is now fully episodic. There's no real doubt about that. As to why the shift in business model, well, there is a post over on the Hitman website in that regard, and they have made some argument in favor of why this is a good idea, but frankly, I find most of it to be utter fluff. They claim the shift will ensure the best possible foundation for the game in the future of Hitman. They also claim that it will allow them to create a living game that will expand and evolve over time. This initial game release will help us build the foundation, they said, for where we want to take Hitman. The first game is part 1 of a storyline we see expanding over the release of subsequent games, so we want to make absolutely sure we get things right. This does not in any way, of course, explain why the game is episodic, because it's not as if the idea of sequels and multiple games is a new thing, and it has been executed successfully for decades now in the traditional format. They claim they'll be able to respond much faster to feedback, analyze player behavior, and implement changes on a regular basis, and that simply was not possible before, because apparently patches aren't a thing. We'll be able to craft a long story arc that spans multiple games, they said, while at the same time crafting smaller arcs and stories that will find their conclusions within each game. What a new and original concept. Never seen that done before. How does this benefit consumers? That's the first question that I would ask. Now, I do have one way to explain how it could. For a long time, I've been in favor of having different business models for games in such a way that consumers could buy parts of the game as opposed to the whole thing if, say, they didn't want the multiplayer component, or they didn't want the single-player component, or if they just wanted to pay as they went because maybe they got sick of the game halfway through, so why should they pay for the rest of it that they didn't play? Now, this is a model that has worked to some degree on mobile devices and was spearheaded primarily by Capcom, who released several games, including Ghost Trick, Phantom Detective, as well as Ace Attorney, with a model where the first 2 chapters were free, and subsequent chapters could be bought as you went, or the whole thing could be bought together. Now, of course, this model is quite similar to shareware, which was a fairly early concept before digital distribution really became the primary business model of the PC platform, in which you got the first part of the game for free, and then you could upgrade it by buying chapters or the whole thing. I think that's a fairly consumer-friendly business model. However, there is a very large difference between Hitman's business model and what shareware and Capcom were doing. The difference is quite clear. One of these products is already done, and you get the option to buy it in pieces. The other product isn't. What Hitman is doing here is very similar to the sort of thing that Telltale has been doing. And if you've followed Telltale games, you know exactly what kind of problems that can bring. Telltale Games has frequently suffered from delays in terms of its episodic series, unable to keep to a reasonable time frame. And of course, what that results in is a lack of player retention. We decided, kind of on a whim with the Co-optional Podcast, to have a look at some of the Telltale Games achievements and find out how much player retention those games really had, and we saw some surprisingly large drop-offs in the amount of people that had beaten Chapter 1 of Episode 1 and had actually finished Episode 1 and moved on to Episode 2. Significant drops within the first few episodes, and the retention slowly slows down throughout the rest of it. What this indicates is a problem that I also have with episodic games, and that is it's difficult to keep me interested in a game that I can't finish when I want to. In order to avoid that problem, of course, you have to wait until the game comes out fully, but let's be honest, with the internet, the whole idea of the zeitgeist of a current game release is actually quite a compelling thing. If your friends are playing a game and you don't want to be left out of the conversation, you have to play it too. And of course, there is a enhanced risk of spoilers if you decide to wait until the full release, particularly with a game that's very narratively driven, such as a Telltale experience. I think with Hitman, you're going to suffer a little bit less from that, but ultimately, it's entering into very risky territory. With Telltale games, when they come out, we know exactly how many episodes are going to be coming in a season. We also have a very good idea of the amount of content we'll be receiving in each episode of the game, because there is past history to go from then, you know. Basically, you can assume that an episode of a Telltale game is going to run you about 2 hours, and you also know what kind of content it's going to contain. We don't know this with Hitman. We don't exactly know how long this prologue is and how much replayability the game actually has. We also don't know how many episodes we can expect from Hitman, so we have no real plan announced as to exactly when these episodes are going to come out, how much content's going to be in them, and how long it's going to take us to beat the intro. Bear in mind, this game is coming out in less than 2 months, so it's not like they have a lot of time to really tell us. There is also a massive risk of abandonment. The problem that I have with this business model is it seems like Square Enix is unwilling to pay for the entire game up front. They're not willing to properly fund IO Interactive to make the whole damn experience. So as a result, they're being forced to release it piecemeal and raise further funds to finish the rest of the game. And also, we've seen problems with that before. Broken Age Part 2, for instance, is a prime example of this. The first part of Broken Age had to be released after the developer somehow managed to burn through $3 million of Kickstarter funding, despite only initially requiring $400,000, and critically, Broken Age Part 2 was actually criticized quite a bit. It scored much lower than Part 1, and honestly, you had a fairly disjointed experience, not to mention the time it took to actually release it. What I see is a grand promise of multiple games and a huge arcing storyline, and yet I have no evidence whatsoever that they'll ever be able to achieve that. If this game doesn't sell well, do you honestly think that Square Enix, the guys that said 6 million copies of Tomb Raider sold was a failure, are going to fund the rest of it? I don't believe that. I really don't. Not to mention there are rumors of cut content with Deus Ex Mankind Divided as well. It seems to me that Square Enix is redesigning its business model in a way that is less risky to them and is more risky for the consumers. I mean, even if they manage to release all of this stuff, I'm sorry, but good luck keeping me interested in a game for over a year. Your game is not that good. There are a lot of other games available. Most of the reason I never finish the Telltale series games is because I lose interest in the interim. Okay, I played the first part, now I've got to wait 2 months. Oh, well, 2 months on, there's another game I'd rather be playing at this point. So, I would imagine that the vast majority of people won't even finish Hitman because the game has failed to maintain interest in the title. I mean, the fact that the game doesn't have multiplayer is probably one of the reasons why it wouldn't. Not that I really need multiplayer in a Hitman game, but usually when I buy a Hitman game, I'm buying a complete experience from start to finish, not the first 2 chunks of it. So, I'm going to say this. Episodic content, or indeed alternative business models in which you can pay as you go, can potentially be beneficial to the consumer. But in this case, I don't believe so. It's shifting risk to the consumer from the publisher, which should never be happening. The publisher is the one that's supposed to take that financial risk, not us. It's setting up a situation where we may get an unfinished game that will never be truly finished. That's a big risk, not to mention the fatigue that will result from the gaps between the various content releases. I do not think this is a good business model for a AAA game. I don't see how it benefits the consumer in any way, and frankly, I am very, very nervous now for the future of Hitman, and that would be a big shame were this content model to fail. The thing is, I don't expect the consumer to support this content model. I don't believe that it's a good one, and frankly, I would hold off until the end of the year. See what's on the disc, see what's on that $60 disc at the end of 2016, and just try not to get spoiled in the interim. Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch, but before I go, I would of course like to give you the OC Remix track of the day. We haven't had one of those in a while. We haven't had a content patch in a while, so let's listen to something brand new from ocremix.org. Last year, of course, marked the tragic passing of a giant of our industry, Satoru Iwata, and a tribute EP called Heart of a Gamer was released on ocremix.org. I'm going to play you the fourth track from that EP. It's by Brandon Strader, and it uses music from Balloon Fight as well as Nintendo Land. It's called On the Wind. If you enjoyed this video, then by all means do feel free to click the like button, or indeed the dislike button if you so desire. I'll see you next time.